them to get engaged in government again, that they were coming to that table. It reminded me of what President Garfield said, that if you have recklessness and corruption in government, it's because you tolerate that recklessness and corruption in government. And so what I heard at that point was that the American people were no longer going to tolerate the recklessness in government. And I'm so glad that the Tea Party are in the room as well, and many coming over the river from New Jersey, and especially Burlington County, New Jersey, because they run my column in their newspaper. So I'm very happy to meet them, as well as I own property in that county because my dad settled there after retirement from the Air Force near McGuire, and after he passed, I'm very concerned about their tax rates. So I'm glad that they also have some change with Chris Christie, because I live in California. I know what it means to pay taxes. We have Proposition 13. So if something didn't happen quickly in New Jersey, their taxes were going to catch up with us in California. And the property is certainly not anywhere near the value of the property in California because we've escalated that. But I was thinking, because we have smaller numbers than a traditional lecture time, that I would keep my comments a little brief and turn it more into like a little town hall, so we can get some questions answered and asked, perhaps even get some of the energy of the Tea Party as our young people are sorting through, how are we going to keep this country free? How are we going to reduce the size and scope of government? One of the reasons I was so happy when the Tea Party came is because I agreed with Frederick Douglass. I did not know that Oliver was going to mention Frederick Douglass. And when people even ask me about Republican, why I would be one, especially those that say that they are concerned about me because they wear the same color skin that I do, and they keep saying that I've just been indoctrinated. Maybe I haven't been able to be thoughtful about why I would come to this conclusion. Well, there are a couple of reasons that I became a Republican. One is because they told me that Republicans are the party of the rich. I said, well, I've been to poor people's parties. Why wouldn't I go to the party of the rich people? Lying and serving the line. Come on. But the main reason is because of Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass said that he was going to die a Republican because they represent freedom and prosperity. And our party, the party of Lincoln, the party of Reagan, still represents freedom and prosperity. A little off track right now, which is the significance of the Tea Party. I was so thankful because the reasons that I came to even the political engagement and getting to the point where I was concerned about policy, understanding that opinion shapes policy and policy then shapes behaviors. And while Americans were sleeping, coming up out of the 60s when public policy began to say that we don't have to think about natural consequences to choices we make anymore. We were developing safety nets. We declared a war on poverty during the same time that we were having a sexual revolution. It was not a good formula for people to engage in the very things that my ancestors believed, as you just heard, that if we could just get free, leave us alone, perhaps we will be able to remain free and be then prosperous in this great country, unique to any country in the world, even though it did take a little while to get rid of slavery and then allow that freedom. But then we saw blacks move from that freedom to Jim Crow, and then from Jim Crow to the welfare state, because this is the mentality that came to be in after the civil rights movement. Dr. King died, and the politicos picked up the baton and took it to Washington, D.C. After he said in his infamous, I have a dream, so I shouldn't call it infamous, I do sometimes, because they just have declared that this is their canon document as opposed to the Constitution, but yet that very speech, I have a dream, tells the blacks that were there, the 250,000 that came, go back into your communities and build. He felt that we had accomplished the mission of the civil rights movement, which was to remove governmental barriers so that man could live free, so that they could get back on the page of what Frederick Douglass knew very well, and many others like him. But those that picked up that baton went to Washington instead, with an attitude to make them pay. I was talking to one of my colleagues the other day, and I reminded him when he kept looking at just the despair that has now confronted the black community because they keep buying into this left-wing idea of liberalism and social justice. He said, when is this going to end? And I had to remind him of his own history of Golda Meir. I said it's similar to what she said when she was covered in the blood of and her people in Israel. And one day the media asked her, when will this end? And she said, when the Palestinians love their children more than they hate Jews. And it's the same in the black community. When will this end? When black people start loving their children more than they hate Republicans, more than they start hating those that they feel were enslavers, and that they're seeking some type of justice that doesn't even exist when they couch it in terms of social justice. I have to remind my black audiences all the time that it's actually the Republicans that are social justice. You've been sold a lie. Because when you think about who Republicans are, all the polling is showing us that if people attend church on a regular basis, they, in the white community, vote Republican. Now, in the black community, it's not true, because blacks attend church much more than any other ethnicity in the country, and yet they still side with those that keep promising, making promises that they can't deliver on. But when you look at the white community, and those that attend church on a regular basis voted Republican, then you have to say, well, who are these people that attend church on a regular basis? They're the people that are exemplifying social justice, because they're the ones that are volunteering in our homeless shelters. They're the ones that are going into our maternity homes, even establishing these homes. When they see a need, they fill it. That's one of the reasons we now have 5,000 crisis pregnancy centers in the country, because although we have not been able to rid ourselves of Roe v. Wade, it may be legal, but it's not lawful in God's eyes. There are decent people that just say that we're going to do something about it, and they started building up this entrepreneurial energy to put crisis pregnancy centers in almost every community across this country now, to where if someone's in a crisis or unplanned, as the left will call it, and or unwanted pregnancy, they have somewhere to go. And we have all types of options available when it comes to adoption and or materials to help them redeem themselves. People all over this country are taking in young women into their own homes and in their own arms so that they will not abort their children. So I have to constantly remind people, no, we are social justice, so we're not going to buy this idea that we should just redistribute more wealth. I bought that lie. Very young in my life, I heard it over and over again from everyone that said that they represented my interests. After Dr. King was killed, within 5 years, Roe v. Wade was national law. So we just kept hearing these ideas of liberalism, that first of all, children are an environmental hazard, so don't have too many. In fact, they'll keep you in poverty if you have too many of them. But also that the social welfare state would be taking care of us, that this idea of redistribution was good, that this idea of rich people having more than they really needed and higher on a political hand to take it from them was a good idea. Poor people were poor because the wealthy were wealthy. And you believe that lie, you will start to make ill decisions for yourself, which is what I began to do. When you think that there's no hope for tomorrow, then you start living very recklessly today, which is not only what I chose to do, but what many, as we're starting to see, and the crumbling of community after community, others are choosing to do as well. You know, very early, believing the lie of the left. I got engaged in criminal activity, and drug activity, and sexual activity. I mean, some people know my story because they keep up with me. I don't get to say a lot of it in my scripts column because my scripts is a liberal distribution service, and so for a while I would write my story and then they just take it out anyway, so it's like, well, I'll try to sneak it in a little bit by little bit. But for those that have followed me know that I have a few books out, and just to give you an idea of the types of things I was engaged in, my autobiography is called Pimps, Whores, and Welfare Brats. And even in that title, I left a lot of information out of it because of statutes of limitations. And in fact, some of that activity was in New Jersey. That's why every time I go to New Jersey, I keep my fingers crossed. Oh, Lord, I'm so glad it was pre-DNA, but you never know. They might find a way to catch up with me one day. And although the prisons are overcrowded and in liberal states, you might not have to worry much about it. Many of the states turn red, so I have to be much more careful going into various states these days. But you get that reckless to where abortion becomes your birth control. It wasn't until after the 4th time I went into one of their so-called safe, legal, rare clinics that I had a gut instinct down inside. Something's wrong with killing your offspring. Maybe it is. You know, it's interesting. I have an opportunity to do a lot of media because I told you public opinion shapes policy, which shapes behavior. And we've seen a lot of the recklessness of policies that were left unchecked shaping the behaviors in our hard-to-hit communities, where it's just now out of control. And then the opinion becomes, we want more government to fix what they broke. So now I work on the opinion side and try to address some of the cultural issues and economic concerns of society. And so I get a chance to do a whole lot of media. I was telling kids earlier today that later this week I'll be doing Hannity again. And I get to do a lot of our side of media, but I go into the secular cesspool quite a bit too. And so I had this one opportunity to do the show The View. You know what happened was they're such a politically correct show that they needed a black. Star Jones had quit, and they didn't have a black, and they just needed a black desperately. They were really desperate. They hadn't found a movie yet, so they were just going through every kind of black they could. Every day they had a black on there just so they could paint this picture of how wonderful they are as human beings that just love social justice. So John Stossel thought a good idea for me to go on there, and I thought, I would not go on that show. And so he said, well, at one point, Michael Moore was the guest on there. He He said, you know what, Michael Moore came out with this movie, Sicko, and he would not debate anyone, and we needed to talk about socialized medicine because we were moving on that track, and this is years, Bush was still in office, so it was years before we got to the point where Obamacare became the discussion. So I told him, you know what, I do need to go in there because I do have a question for Michael Moore. I just want to know why he went to Cuba and Canada to see socialized medicine. He could have gone to Compton or Camden if you want to see what happens when the government controls healthcare. So I want to ask him about that. So I had to sit for 45 minutes between Barbara Walters and Joy Behar to get to that question. Which is why, Lord willing, I'm doing my penance now. When I get to heaven and if I find out there are any other things to repent for, I'll do it at that time. But then I'm going to have a question for the Lord, and that is, do I get an extra crown for going on that show? It's 45 minutes between these two ladies. But the reason I'm telling you all that is because Mike Bishop told me a long time ago, when you go on these national shows, stop screaming at them. Just stop it. Because you're not debating them. You're talking to the millions of people sitting on their couch looking to hear truth, that have their television clicker. Just tell your story, why you believe what you believe. So I determined I'm going to do this on this show. So I started telling my story. And what was interesting is when I said that I had had 4 abortions, it actually made Joy uncomfortable. You know, she started moving around. She said, well, why would you abort so many times? Which left a door open for me to ask her why she would support me. I said, well, and why she would object to me aborting so many times. I asked her, well, if it's right one time, why is it wrong 20? And she started sorting through what she was going to say next and wanted to go off on this birth control contraceptive tangent. I said, wait a minute, they have risk on the bottle. You've convinced Americans that, and around the world, you guys will promote this idea that there are no medical, no moral, no mental implications to abortion, so why would everybody use it for birth control? So you can understand why the next 45 minutes was extremely difficult, because that was very early in the show for me to express that. But I did want her to know that their ideas have consequences, that choice loses its meaning if it doesn't matter what you choose. And I didn't know these things in my own life at that point, and so within a very short period of time, I was pregnant again. And when you tell people that you can remove all barriers to your sexual energy, then people will become very reckless in their sexual expression, as we are seeing in every area. Or demographic group in our society today. And so I was very reckless and ended up pregnant again. And this time I went on the welfare. So I know their system from the inside. I was in and out 7 years, 3.5 years consistently. It's how I paid for my abortions. The California taxpayers were dragged into having this type of blood on their hands. And it wasn't until a Christian conversion that I just changed my mind. And it's probably why the left hates me, and why I do run onto some campuses, and they do put it on their calendar just to bring the enemies out so that they will try to shut me down. And in other places, other political forums, you know, I can run into some challenges. But because the reality is that there is this insistence in society that they don't want to know about true testament, to where you can not only change your life, but that you can put a mirror next to liberalism and prove that is left wanting. When you think about not just what it did to my life, but what it's done and the damage that it's done to many, many lives, I changed my life. I just said, you know what, I'm making new decisions for myself. I went to college, I got a degree, I studied marketing and international business. I was at that point I started working for this little business, and I figured if I could sell for him, I could sell for myself. I ended up in my own business. And after the 1992 Los Angeles riots, my business was destroyed, but I wasn't going back to welfare. Once people start to recover their lives, especially if you go into business, I don't think that you have appreciation of welfare anymore. You already know, I knew firsthand from the inside how cruel Uncle Sam is to the people that he says he's trying to help. You talk about slavery. I mean, the one thing that was recovered during the slavery of my ancestors was their dignity. They attempted to hold on to that and pass it to their children so one day they could live free. And I'm telling you, Uncle Sam steals that dignity, and people then become generational to be comfortable in this new type of slavery, trying to live off the rules. Don't work, don't save, don't get married, and we'll just kind of keep you enslaved to this poverty plantation mentality and throw you off into one of our 4,000 housing projects and give your kids an education that's going to land them in jail or their blood running in the street one day. And that was the reality of the welfare state. But you go into business and you find out that Uncle Sam is just as cruel to the business owner. And in fact, that's one of the reasons people ask me, well, how did you change your views? I said, well, my social philosophies and worldview changed because I became a Christian. And so I started cleaning up my decisions. But I said my economic philosophy changed because I went into business. And you start hearing from these agencies that you don't even know exist, and how much intrusion of the state. We were in a restaurant and said, we asked that owner today, what is really under your right now? And he would tell you the excessive regulation, the excessive taxation, all of the permits, all that it takes now to be in business. And I was dealing with that, and dealing with that over 8 years, and my business was still able to grow, even amidst this environment that Uncle Sam had set up to make sure that I was not able to, just be left alone to run this business. But once the 92 riots just destroyed everything in LA, I wasn't going back to welfare because I could remember depositing more money in a week than the welfare had sent me in a year. You can get so far away from that plantation that you no longer want that mentality. And then I began to build a desire to not want it for my community anymore. When you think about the damage that has been done by liberals controlling almost every city in this country for the last 40 years, we can look at the mirror reflection to see what happens when you turn your lives over to government. There's just no excuse for them to continue to make the political promises that they made, unchallenged. Now, for years, Republicans and or conservatives were afraid to challenge them, but the evidence is there. As Bill Cosby said when he was confronted about, you're airing our dirty laundry, when he finally started to speak it out. He said, your laundry is getting out of school at 2:30 every day. Everybody sees this. And he was not able to sustain the mechanisms within the liberal infrastructure of the black community, so he ended up back on the liberal plantation. But at least he spoke some truth into it for a little bit of while. The liberal model to keep people tight is built just like the plantations that they used to run. Democrats were in charge of slavery, so they haven't changed their operational manual. They still run the plantation exactly the same. The nanny state, and then you have these overseers, and the overseer's job is to make sure that every slave just stays in place, that no one goes free, that no one even speaks about ideas of freedom, or you will be committing social suicide. In those cases, sometimes it would cost you much more than it can cost a black conservative today in our society, just to say we know that something has gone wrong. And in fact, it was Democrats who passed the Fugitive Slave Act, and once they did, in the North, they had to return the slaves to the South. And the overseer's job was to make sure that he'd send a message to the rest of them. And so he'd bring out all the other slaves and then make them watch him strip the skin off of that one slave that did try to run away. And if anything was left to sell off, they would just sell them off. And so people became very comfortable. And that's what has happened uniquely in the black community, because it was the most vulnerable community when they started this social engineering in the 60s. And their lives have collapsed, their families have deteriorated, their schools are still underperforming, their drugs and crime are out of control, and yet they hear the same political promise and they just can't seem to break free. It's underappreciated that in the 60s, how healthy black family life still was, even though there were some areas of concern. Out-of-wedlock birth rates were a little high, but it's underappreciated that 70% of black children were being raised in marital households. You fast forward today after the social engineering of the left, and 70% of black children are raised in single households. And when you start thinking about the difference between a household that has marital parents and a single household, and those children that are birthed into that situation, the first lesson that a child learns is that commitment is not important. You'll know that from 2 years old. I'm sure it was in the car, coming over about my little grandson, 6, and working in social reform, of course, you look at everything from in the eyes of their work, more often than not. And so even with my little grandson, I love him dearly, and when he was 2 years old, I taught him how to write on the walls at his house, and I told him how to tell his dad that he didn't need a bedtime. And because Grandma said I don't, and so now his dad's put him in Catholic school so they can learn how to behave, but that's a whole other story. But I did notice one thing about this little 2- and 3-year-old, and we know it already inherently, but we also know it if you study any type of psychology or any other courses that talk about human behavior. We know that when a child is birthed into a single-headed household, the first thing that he sees is non-committal. He just doesn't have 2 parents. Now, we can try to pretend all day, and we can into a blue in the face to try to convince people that they don't need a mom and a dad, and we can tell them that the union between 2 sexes is the same. Well, we can even look into these housing projects and see that notion is left wanting. We have a lot of these families, in quotes, that are set up to where you have 2 women that love that child, the mom and the grandmom, and yet life doesn't seem to work there. In fact, it's not worked there to the point that we've left it as a magnet for sexual prowlers. And so now the HIV virus is in our housing projects, and AIDS has become the #1 killer of black women between 25 and 34. And we're sick, and the sickness continues because we just won't revisit that moment in our history to say, did we do the right thing? Is it really social justice to convince a community of people that Uncle Sam would be their provider, that they don't need a marital household, and that Uncle Sam will provide the education for their children? Is it a good idea to sell this idea of womb to tomb philosophy if we can look at what has happened in the black community as a case study for what we don't want to happen in the rest of society? It's already very rapidly happened in the rest of society. The reason it happened and hit the black community first is because it was economically poor. So it didn't have an infrastructure built to fight it off, as some other communities do. But make no mistake, these ideas of the left, the secular socialism, are equal opportunity destroyers. And we're starting to see the breakdown in other communities as well. The Latino out-of-wedlock birth rate today is 48%. The white community, in the 60s, those same 60s, out-of-wedlock birth was 3%. Today, it's 30%. And what we're starting to see are the same social pathologies that broke black family life and broke black community life starting to happen in the white community, where you have low educational aspiration with their males. You know, it's interesting when you think about the biological clock and how it is so important that we're going to now have to have this discussion about reproduction and you know, the rights that they have somehow found in the Constitution, where I'm supposed to pay for your birth control and your sexual lawlessness. But if you want to have this conversation about control and birth, perhaps we should, because when you think about the biological difference between male and female, and consider that the woman is the social stabilizer because she holds the biological clock. God put outside of nature only two places where we can see time. One is in the week for worship, and one is in the woman, so that we can stabilize the society. And as women start to manipulate that biological clock, men lose track of time, and that's what we have seen throughout the history of American people, to where as women increase in their role and or dependency in government, the men are the ones that educationally start falling behind. And it's not only has already happened in the black community, where we're looking at 95% of these prisoners have no relationship with their father. 70% of our youth incarcerated have no relationship with their father. But we're starting to see these pathologies running into the white community, to the point that even social thinker, libertarian social thinker Charles Murray has written his new book, said, Coming Apart. I mean, this is the person that gave us Losing Ground in Belkirk, where he was looking at and comparing black and white life and saying, there's something really challenging over here and that we should take notice of. And of course, he left out some of the dimensions that even de Tocqueville, who's also a libertarian hero, even though they dismiss what he has said about the influence of religion and or and healthy family living, they're starting to have to even rethink in those areas, because when Charles Murray looked at it in a black situation, he was called outside his name, the same way the Tea Partiers are, to point to something that's obvious to others. But now that he's looking at the white community, people are taking notice to say that we really are coming apart. The elite, interestingly, have kept the values and the traditions of our forefathers. They're still married, they still go to church. And yet the poor of the white community are starting to really come apart, because they're taking on some of the same scenarios that we have seen in the black community for the last 40 years. And if we continue down this path, we will start seeing the same destruction in all of our society that we've seen in the black community. It's one thing to keep it isolated to 13% of the population and try to make changes if you can. It's another one, it's everywhere, where this cancer is so vivid and aggressive. That like in cancer in your body, at a certain point, even the surgeons give up hope, and short of a miracle, we could die. And that's some of the message that we're starting to hear from people that are concerned that America could actually die. You know, Margaret Thatcher said it best, at a certain point you start running out of other people's money. And the challenge with our society today, even in this economic downturn, is that we're just too big, we're too government dependent. And you know, as I said, the black community has already gone that route. And what's really fascinating is that they were on this journey and convinced Americans to start pouring millions, and we're into trillions of dollars into the poverty war. And yet poverty, although has fluctuated, is still right about the same thing it was in the 60s. It was black poverty rate was 25%. Today it's right about that, going up a little bit because of the economic downturn. And much of that is because of the government dependency when it comes to other areas. Government is still the #1 employer of black men and the second largest of black females. So there's a very government-dependent community. But But when you start thinking about how in all of society, what has gone on with the economic collapse, we can point to Fannie Mae, we can point to Freddie Mac, we can point to Wall Street, we can try to point to any and every other place that we want to use as a scapegoat. You know, the 1% of what the occupiers are crying about now. You know, I've always been for the underdog, but I never thought on that list would be Wall Street bankers and you know, doctors, but they're just like on the hit list now. We kind of need them in our society because profit is good. You know, free markets are the engine for us to create jobs for tomorrow. But when you think about the government dependency in all of society, that is the core of what is broken down in our culture today. We have now a situation where 70% of all monies that come into the government coffers, the intake of government outside of defense, and separate out defense, of all money, 70% is transferred to another individual. We can't go on like this. You think spending $400 billion in these poverty programs and then barely being able to name one that's working is a challenge. Let's look at what happens when you have everybody dependent on government, which is perhaps why Barack Obama got a lot of pushback on healthcare. Healthcare, the government always controls half the healthcare in this country through Medicare and Medicaid. And we're talking about programs that have no sustainability whatsoever. I could spend all evening telling you how we will not be able to recover from even the $70 trillion unfunded liability coming because of Medicare and Social Security. We just have a model that is just not sustainable anymore. You can't have everybody dependent on their neighbor to take care of them. And that's just the point that we've gotten to. The root of our economic crisis is government dependency. The size and scope of government is just too big. At a certain point, you can say, well, let's just move the engine so that we can get more, get more, get more. So at a certain point, you have to take the credit card and you stop the spending. You know, people always want to ask me about, well, the Tea Party just seems real racist. You know, I said, look, this has nothing to do with the brother. Okay, they even voted for him, some of them. They got deceived, like you. And they thought that he was actually a friend of America, a friend of, no, this has nothing to do with him being black. This has to do with green. This man went through $4 trillion in 3 years. Oh no, we have to take the credit card because this will totally destroy the little bit of health that's left in this society. When you have only 1%, as they want to say, that have any type of wealth, we should know just from that we're in trouble. Why would you want more poor people than wealthy people in the first place and think that you're going to be able to help somebody? The people that are benevolent, money if you don't have any, and when you want to be successful, benevolent, which is a part of success. You know, if you look at the 4 stages that people move through in their life, significance is that final stage. You can't be significant to pass on and give to somebody else if you don't have anything. So we have to change the desires that we say we have to be more consistent with the founding of this country. It was founded in freedom and personal responsibility. And when you think of this notion of redistribution of wealth, it is inconsistent with the founding of this country. We're founded on freedom and personal responsibility. And this thing is not only inconsistent with the founding of this country, it's inconsistent with the scripture. When you think about those of us that come from a biblical worldview, the 10th commandment says don't covet. And socialism is rooted in covetousness. Somebody has something somebody else doesn't have, so we go hire politicians to take it from them. That's theft. So now we violated 2 commandments, the 8th and the 10th, and we expect to be blessed? It's just not going to happen. What we're going to have to do is start recovering ourselves. We're going to have to get representatives in Washington who believe in a limited government. You know, the role of government is to protect our interests and our pursuits, not to plunder them. And the way that we've had this excessive taxation lately, and those that are demanding more, we have to have more than just the Tea Party. We have to start taking the matches, as I like to say. We put out fires all day, but one day you just have to take the matches. And I think that that's what this coming election is all about, because you know, it's not sustainable financially what we've been doing. But then on the other side of it, if we really want to help people, you know, this is what the left always says that their real mission in life is to make ourselves much more human by helping others. Well, of course, they're saying that as they're killing 50 million in the womb, the most defenseless, you know, amongst us, that they want to pull them limb by limb. And then wonder why we have a Social Security crisis. You take 50 million out of society, of course you're going to have challenges we're trying to sustain a pyramid scheme, Ponzi. Well, if it were a business, you know it'd be illegal. You can't do that. You can't take current workers and pay for current retirees, and now the pyramid is turned upside down. No, if they really wanted to be benevolent, then they should consider alternatives to what we've been doing for the last 50 years. This is why I challenge them every time, because it's an absolute lie that they are the ones that are exhibiting social justice when their whole determination and their whole mission is to redistribute wealth and to not ever touch anything that is individual or hands-on. You can see it in every single step out of poverty where liberals are on the wrong side of this equation. If they really wanted to help poor people, then they would help us talk about traditional values and responsibility. Because the first lesson, the first step out of poverty is self-government. You're not leaving poverty if you do not rein yourself in. Like Frederick Douglass said, don't do anything for us. Let us work at it ourselves. You've got to rein in your decisions. The first step out of poverty, as I told, housing project after housing project, women in welfare after women in welfare, as they're crying and trying to now recover their lives after believing that lie so long that now they have 3 children all by different men. And that little subsidy that you try to get from the government is just not working for them or their family. As I have to tell them, no, you have to be responsible for your choices. You have an obligation to your neighbor to be responsible for your choices and to be self-sufficient. That's how you first get on that first rung out of poverty. This is the decision that nobody else can make for you. This is why after I recovered my life and then after those 92 riots, I began to be more focused on social justice. Social justice in Washington, D.C. is why I work in Washington. Now I live in California, I commute to Washington, D.C. just to say the answer to poverty is freedom. It's prosperity. The answer to poverty is not a welfare state. It's making decisions that are right for your life, the first step. And so we put time limits in the federal welfare bill. I consulted on that bill. I got death threats against me just because I felt that, you know, time is a social stabilizer. It makes people sit up and think about their lives. This is something that people had lost track of, and that's why they were 2 and 3 generations now into this dependency and didn't know how they were going to get out. You know, we all know, just in our normal life and life movement, that time is a social stabilizer. You know, the kids were talking earlier, which one's the freshman? Their mindset is not like the one that's the senior. I mean, the senior, come on, he's thinking about getting a job and getting out there and moving his life. The freshman's thinking about partying. You know, he just got here. And so this is time to live a little bit free. We understand in other areas of our lives probably why the guys do run from marriage, because they know that the minute they marry, babies are coming. And so it makes you, have to think about your life. And then grandchildren really make you think about getting out some diet and changing your. Someone said, "You sure look like a young grandma." I'm like, "Yeah, I'm changing the image of grandma. I'm trying to do everything to stay young." But believe me, with Mr. James, there are times I'm like, I'm just exhausted. So I'm so glad my daughters have a little girl. If we could, I could go to Neiman's and we can drink tea, instead of just ride a bike endlessly. And then next thing you know, as soon as you finish riding a bike with him, and I'm just pulling, and he's like, "Okay, Grandma, let's go play basketball." I'm like, "Oh." But we needed those time limits in welfare. Come on, the girls needed to start thinking about their lives, and they were able to do that when we passed a bill that really was social justice, that really cared about them, that thought about them not as a number, as the government has been doing for the last 50 years, but started thinking about them as individuals, unique with gifts and talents. As I've had to tell a lot of younger groups that their fate is not your destiny. What was funny was one time I was at a place. They were they were in one of these youth programs, and so when I said your faith is not your destiny, they made me take notes and stuff. The guy said, "Your faith is not your destiny." I was like, "Oh no, honey, not faith." I was so glad because he would have went home and kept looking at his faith is not his destiny. I'm like, no, faith, F-A-T, the set of circumstances you were born in. Now I know you've been told all your life because you were born poor, that somebody owes you a living, and you're gonna die poor if they don't help you. But that's not true. The set of circumstances that you have right now does not have to be your tomorrow, and you give them examples of people that have a new tomorrow just because they were responsible with their choices. But there are other things that we can do once they decide that I'm going to take that first step. I'm going to start cleaning up my act, and I'm going to start making more responsible choices. We as a society, if we really were concerned about poor people, we would start reversing the damage that we're doing to this general welfare state. $1 billion a day we're spending on these poverty programs that every single one of them are hurting the people that we say we're helping. And we would allow for more work to develop. Because the second step out out of poverty is to work. You know? Now, they have a responsibility in this too. And as I've mentioned them many times, you get in and you just work harder than the person above you. Take any job, just get in and work harder than the person above you. And don't give me these ideas of minimum wage law, because see, minimum wage laws hurt that first run. Minimum wage laws create an environment where we don't have the business that we need in the harder hit communities. You know, if we would get rid of just minimum wage laws for people under 21, we would solve two problems overnight. One, we get those young men off the street corner and into these small businesses so that they can help and learn so they can help the small business owner who needs them, and they can learn a skill set. But we also diminish this illegal immigration challenge that's in our society today, because these illegals are just doing things that our 12-year-olds are supposed to be doing, but we pass all these stupid laws that don't allow them to get out there and do them anymore, whether it's cutting our grass or watching the children or cleaning the homes. So what we need to do is rethink labor policy. We've got to start thinking about what it is that we've done to hurt people that are trying to just get in and develop out a skill set so that they can begin their journey to recover their lives and maybe live prosperous. The third step out of poverty is to get education and build on those skills that you've learned. And that's why it's so important that they get an opportunity to learn as they're real little people, to develop in them whatever it is that they're going to do. I meet too many kids at these colleges that still don't even know what it is they're going to do. And then yet you look back on their life and say, my parents should have known I would be entrepreneurial, because they would delegate little responsibilities like washing dishes. And I never washed a dish in my life. I actually would steal money out of my mother's purse to pay my sister to wash those dishes. So I was almost destined to my daughter now, she's married now, and she's hi ladies, thank you for coming in. I know that you got to go back to nursing school. I know. They came to dinner with us, so I just want to say hello to them, and I know that they have class. But my daughter, as she was growing and learning a little bit of skill, she was so organized, and so she now has that trait of organization that she is now taking into an acting career, because you've got to be majorly disciplined to go into acting. That's why these liberals can't understand how they are just so liberal, and yet their own lives are not reflecting the very things that they push to the poor. Because they certainly don't do them. They have to be very focused and very disciplined, and that's what we need in our workforce. So we have to allow for opportunities for work to develop. That means removing governmental barriers, getting rid of this excessive taxation and regulation. You wonder why unemployment rates are so high in our inner cities? Because most of them have these excess taxes. They layer on environmental policies that are hurting the very community that these liars say that they're trying to help. And so, that's an area that, and they say, well, Republicans just want to say, no, Republicans always say the same exact thing. That's because we're right. You're right. You don't have to. If you reduce taxes, people have more money to spend. It's just not rocket science. And those are the things that we want to do. But also in education, we want to get their children a new worldview, if you will, and make sure that they start understanding what this country is about, because they're certainly not getting in these public schools. They were telling me about one of the emails that somebody wrote in me coming to this campus, that they were going to come, but now they decided they weren't because I want to privatize the schools. I said, I don't want to privatize the schools. I want to compete with the schools. Every time we see competition with the public schools, when money follows children to the schools that their parents want, the public schools start to correct. We have a very good example. We have about 13 pilot voucher programs in the country now, because when the Supreme Court ruled in 2003, they did rule that vouchers are not unconstitutional. They could go to religious schools, but they didn't go far enough, in my opinion, as far as Brown versus Board of Education went, to where they said, well, it is unconstitutional to trap certain kids in certain schools. Because that's all they're doing now. They want to tell us that vouchers are for rich white people. Honey, rich white people don't need a voucher. Rich people have school choice. They can buy the building and put their name on it, put Johnny on the front row. The teacher, they don't need it. It's not for them. It's not even for the middle class. I mean, if they want to find, but now the middle class, they can homeschool, and they can move out in communities where they have decent schools. No, vouchers are for poor parents. So money will follow them to schools that they want. And in the 13 experiments that we have in the country, where money follows just a few too, they're very small samples because they're left. You want to see the minimum left, get involved in school choice. You want to see what liberals do in their social justice program. They trap children in family schools year after year after year, while their money is invested in the stock market of prisons. It's just unbelievable because a lot of the jails are on the stock market, and the public schools are not. If you really want to fix the public schools, put them on the stock market. I bet you immediately people will start investing and we can really recover some of the damage that the left has done. But follow children to the school the parent wants to. And the classic example that we now have for that is in Washington, D.C. Most of you have heard about the voucher program that passed in Washington. It was very difficult to get that. You know, I was more a cheerleader on it. I work a lot in getting the message out about school choice. But one of my dear friends, Virginia Walton Ford, was the one that did the heavy lifting on that. She was a hero on that because she would take 50 black kids to that Congress every single day for 2 years. She just would take them over there and say, why can't my kid go to your kid's school? Because see, most of the congressional leaders have their children in private schools. And most of the teachers in D.C. have their children in private schools. But these kids couldn't go to the private school because the money wouldn't follow them. And so finally, they were able to get that bill passed. It took a lot of work. In fact, I think even her, Senator Arlen Specter, they had to run an ad in his neighborhood with the kid in pigtails saying, how come I can't go to the same school you go to? So he kind of like, oh my God, you can't run that in my local paper. And he took the Mary Landry to, you know, black girl with little pigtails saying, how come Mary doesn't want me to go to the same school her kids go to? So she was staying from voting. So that was kind of cool to get Louisiana out of our way. And so the voucher bill passed. It was 1,700 students availed to it. It was $7,500. And yes, Barack Obama did take them away. But some interesting things happened before he took them away, and then we got them back in CRs. And they did come back because a lot of black parents came down and protested. CNN forgot to tell you guys that. With the guy there, somebody actually had a picture of black parents in front of the Department of Education showing that they wanted those vouchers back. But what happened, what was interesting about those 1,700 vouchers, in order to qualify, you had to be the most at-risk of at-risk. You had to be in the most desperate situation, in the most poor of poor. Every type of means test that they could throw out there was just the worst of the worst and the worst of the worst schools. And even though there were 1,700 of them, they received almost 40,000 applications there in Washington, D.C. And so they had to mount a lottery. It was just so sad to see that many parents are that desperate to get their kids a quality education. And it's liberals that stand in the way of that. But anyway, the point I was going to make about me not wanting to privatize their schools, what I want to do is compete with their schools, because what was interesting about that particular voucher program is once it was implemented and the parents started sending their kids into these different school environments, the private school environments, not only did that child's life start to change and the parents' life start to change, it did create another problem because it was also income capped. And if the parent made more income, then they lost the voucher. So you got to where the parents were like, maybe we better stay poor because my kid will lose its voucher. So, you know, every now and then things need to be tweaked. But what was interesting is it opened up the door for better education in the public schools. That's when we ended up with the mayor, Fenty, hiring Reed, Michelle Reed, who some of you are familiar with, who then began to change the D.C. schools. And that didn't happen until competition moved in. You know, if you have McDonald's in town and they're the only hamburger and yet they're not necessarily using beef, you don't have a choice. But once Burger King moves in, now you have options. And the next thing you know, you have 5 or 6 choices. And that's what America's all about. And it's competition that keeps us growing and keeps us good and keeps us flourishing and keeps some getting wealthy so that then they will have what they need to give back. Because that's one step out of poverty. We've got to educate. We have to allow people opportunities to educate, and especially educate their young. When we think about who's unemployed right now, we don't have to think about it. We just look at the data and see who's unemployed right now. The numbers are much higher in the communities where they have less education. If you have a college degree, you know, and you're married, you're faring a little bit better than the people that are with a high school diploma and or have dropped out and they're single. And then it gets worse when they have children that they're also trying to support. So if we're really trying to fix what's broken, then the first thing we should do is be honest about what is broken and how it got that way so that we can start to change it. Because even on the 4th step out of poverty, saving and investing, here you have liberals fighting on the wrong side of the poor. And that's why I always question, wait, who really is it that's standing in the way of progress in our hard-to-get communities? We all know that in order to prosper, you've got to save and invest. And yet, they want to tell us when we talk about personal retirement accounts, the stock market, you can't trust that. That's just rich white people trying to steal from you again. I mean, rich white people are not retiring on Social Security. Those poor people that retire on Social Security, their only little means of retirement is on Social Security. Rich white people have other ways that they're going to make sure that they're secure in their retirement. And I'm tired of the same old record I mean, it's bad enough they're trying to pull these dinosaur programs from the last century into this one, but do you have to sing the song that you were singing back into? I mean, how many times we hear about this class warfare, the same story, time and time again. But, you know, social security accounts, no, these would have a marginal benefit for the poor. But today, the only little bit they have to put it into you know, a program they don't own. They can't transfer. They get a horrible rate of return. You know, they're up against, for those of you that are biblical, scripture says a good man leaves an inheritance to his grandchildren. But our poor people can't do that. No, because that only little bit they have. And for people who want to tell me how risky the market is, my mom, you know, she passed away, God rest her soul, but prior to that, she was on her little Social Security, and she getting $700 a month. Now, had my mom, over her working life, because they always want to look into the future, oh, you can't, look what happened. Now, all we hear in Washington now is, see, what if the market had crashed? Well, if you retire that year, you might have difficulty. You might not be able to move as quickly as you thought you were, and your portfolios are supposed to change over time anyway, and most people will try to move to annuities and other things and stay engaged. What the founders set up is a life of engagement for us in America. We have to stay involved in it, in the political process as well as our own lives, to be responsible every step of the way. So yeah, you know, socialism might be really attractive if you just want to think about yourself and think about your life. But you know, you can't convince my mom, when we go backwards, or convince me that on my mom's life, if I look at the Social Security, the market activity over the last 50 years of her working line, that she would not have fared better than $700 a month. But the only little bit they make them pay into the system that is so fundamentally flawed. You know, current workers paying for current retirees. This is the next big hurdle that we've got to hit. This discussion on the presidential is not just about the economy. This is about entitlements. This is about who are we going to be. I think we're at that same point we were in the 1850s when Abraham Lincoln looked in the Bible and said, a house divided against itself can't stand. We are half slave and half free. Oh no, this is not going to work. You know, we're going to be all one or the other. He didn't think the union would dissolve, but we were going to fight it out to find out which one we were going to be. And that's what we have to do today, because we can't go on like this. Half makers, half takers. You hear 47% have no skin in the game paying taxes, and yet 48% are government dependent. This is not going to work. 40% of all births are paid for by Medicaid. 60% of all long-term health nursing home, and we're still moving to that trend. No, we're at that point. Let's make a decision. Are we going to be free and responsible, or are we going to be secular and socialistic? And that's the choice that's coming into this next election. And hopefully we'll get a little bit more clarity that that's exactly what's at stake, because the next leader of the free world is not going to be a technocrat. It's not someone that can just go out there and put a screwdriver to the economy. It has to be a visionary to try to help us change the course of our entitlement programs, or we're going to collapse. And Social Security is the first place that will occur. The demographics have shifted in this country. When you think about those 80 million baby boomers and everybody buying that children were environmental hazards, so the pyramid turned upside down, because while grandma had 9, mama had 5, I had 2 and lost one of those. This happened all over the country. And so it's upside down. And the only options are for the youth to just pay much more taxes for the baby boomers as they begin to retire. We have 10,000 baby boomers 10,000 people every single day turning 65 to collect their what's due. You gotta be kidding. And there was one girl at one school said, oh no, Miss Parker, we have other choices. We don't have to do the personal retirement accounts because we have a final choice that's called euthanasia. Young lady, we're not gonna let you kill us. We're baby boomers, we stay in shape. We've been working a long time, we're gonna live a long time. And before we do that, or you better be ready to turn over 50% of your income, maybe 70% of your income, to take care of all of us that have bought this idea that there's some trust fund sitting over there with your name on it. No, 90% of revenues that come in for Social Security go immediately out to pay the current retiree. And that's what's going to happen if we don't change the system. But in relation to what we're discussing here, social justice and poor people, the only little bit they have, they should be able to have ownership in. They need to be able to build their net worth. This is one of the challenges confronting Black America. They have a little bit of cash coming in, but they have no equity, they have no net worth. And it's one of the reasons that I fought so hard when Bush first put on the table the possibility of personal retirement accounts, so that they can put their money into ownership opportunities. The net worth in this country for white community, even the economic situation we're looking at, is still right about $80,000. The net worth in Black America is $4,000. This is a poor community, and if you don't have a net worth, then you can't get money. And they want to keep saying, well, it's because of redlining, any kind of line, and you keep blaming the bank so that they can shut them down, dry up capital, and make people even more government dependent and not able to go and live free and start their own business. Or we can allow them to start investing their money so that they can build wealth themselves. And I tell you, the wealthy just fare so much better than others. So I'm going to close there. We have a lot to consider. If we're really going to help people, because of course the fifth step out of poverty, why we want people out of poverty freely, is because the fifth step is charity, to help someone help themselves. I mean, Mother Teresa had it right. You change one, you've changed the world. You touch one, you've touched everyone. And so charity has to be local, and it's one of the reasons that the welfare state will never work out of Washington. Less than 80 cents on a dollar actually reaches the households we say we're trying to help. 20 cents on a dollar reaches there. 80 cents on a dollar is in the bureaucracy. We send our money to Washington, the federal government takes some off the top, which is interesting. We're going to be at HHS at a protest this Friday. And what's interesting about the federal welfare, which is HHS, for those of you that know health and human services, or all the welfare programs housed in one building, what's really interesting about it is on Independence Avenue. Go figure who decided on that. These guys are mocking us, you know. But they build that bureaucracy, then they send some down to states, and they have their own bureaucracy. Then it gets down to county, they have one, and then it gets down to city, and then we tell the home, oh, we'll help you. We'll give you a few little food stamps and a medical card, a little bit of cash, and you don't think about it. Somebody else will think about it for you. And we really think that we're exhibiting justice. No, actually, justice is charity. It's one-on-one. It's engaged in our lives. And the more resources you have, the more you have opportunity to do that. And we do that. Don't ever believe that, well, Americans will never take care of the poor. Like they said when I did the overshoot. She said, well, if you change welfare, we're going to have children starving and women dying in the streets. I'm like, honey, you need to get out more. You look at what's happened in this country. $400 billion that Americans are forced to send into federal coffers where they created this mess. Over and above that, they spend another. They give away $300 billion in this country freely. And that does not include church activity. That's just free giving to nonprofit. And then over and above that, they give away another $300 billion internationally to help other people. Don't you ever believe that we are not the exhibitors of social justice. We are social justice. We are the definition of social justice. My last story embodies American exceptionalism. Of course I believe in American exceptionalism. That anyone from anywhere, any background, if you mess up and you start again, you can live in peace and prosperity in this country. Oh no, we're not going to let the left win on this one. We're certainly not going to let them mock us. But I am encouraged that we have a few things moving on our side. Blacks are starting to scratch their head looking at this economic downturn. As we've heard in our community for a long time, when America has a cold, Black Americans get pneumonia. And while America's looking at 9%, they're looking at 19% unemployment. And in some of our harder hit communities, at 30% unemployment. So Barack Obama's falling apart in the polling in this particular community. And then also the census, the 2010 census showed us Black folks are getting a little weary of liberalism. They might not know why, but they sure left those blue states and ran to those red states quickly. The last census showed Chicago alone 25%. Left, went south. That's why I'm in the South. In fact, I'll be going south tomorrow because I have to make sure they understand why they went to red states and what red states have and blue states don't. Red states are right to work and right to carry, and this is important. One generation out of slavery. I never met the man, but I heard he had an edict. Asked out, if you want to stay free, you need two things, property and a gun. So I'm not allowed to let liberals, before I get to that promised land, start taking away the very thing that we need to stay free. Private property, protection of those interests, and the ability to be able to protect those interests ourselves if our government becomes too tyrannical. But you know what? We don't have to go that way. We're at that point like Abraham Lincoln, and I often ask myself, okay, why did 600,000 have to die to free 4 million? Why didn't 4 million rebel? What happened in their psyche that they would just become that comfortable that they were afraid to just get up and leave? But we're not going to go there. People, you're just declaring civil war. No. We still battle in the voting booth. We have some advantages. The third and final thing that we have to advantage to keep me hopeful is that God created the internet. You know, I know it wasn't Al Gore because Al Gore would be taxed by now. So you know that it's too free, it moves, it's fungible, and they can't catch up with it to try to tax that thing. And so it was God, and it was God for us to get our message out as well. And the Tea Party's getting their message out, the religious right's getting their message out, even us black conservatives are now having a reason to get our message out. I did a radio show just yesterday, this morning, I don't know, the time runs together, I don't wear a watch, I don't know what time it is, or the day of the week it is, or the day. But I do know where I have to be, and when I have to be there. But the host asked me, you know, about Romney and why he's falling behind. He said, do you think it's because, you know, because of the lies that are being spread on the internet? I'm like, lies? No, but the challenge that he's running into is the freedom on the internet. The people actually, decent people with voting power can get out there with no money and just tell all their friends what they feel about something. So yeah, the political apparatus and realities of yesterday have also changed because now people have that voice that they can, and they can express themselves. And at the end of the day, the expression is not to pick up arms, to not take the tactics of the left and start you know, shouting from the stands. You know, politics is business, and it's a business kind of like baseball, because sometimes it gets really quiet. But we can, you know, yell at the call, or you can join the team, pick one, and get in there and take over. And we still do battle in the voting booth, and we still have the opportunity in our great country to exercise this freedom and to vote for representatives that are we the people. I mean, we have a representative government. As long as we still have that, we can remain hopeful that we can stay free. So thank you so much for allowing me to share my What time is it? Because we said we were going to get out of here about 10 to 9 or 9 o'clock. So
it's like 8:15, so.
Oh, good, because I did leave a lot of time. So if anyone has any question or comment, I'd appreciate it. Yes, sir.
This is the third time I've been fortunate enough to hear you speak.
Oh, wow.
I saw you at the Freedom Center, the Union League, Philadelphia. I saw you at CPAC.
Oh, CPAC. This past CPAC? Or
yes.
one before? Oh.
The one before also.
Oh, okay.
And life. The other thing is,
that's why you saw me all.
you mentioned Golden the Air. I happen to be on the National and Local Boards of Zionist Organization of America. Hopefully that will be the fourth time I hear you speak.
Oh, wow. Yeah, we love that invite.
COA. And what Mayor Kahana said, Rabbi Kahana said almost exactly what you just said. He said it's so arrogant of the Israelis to think that if they give the Arabs indoor toilets, they'll like them.
Yeah, it's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. You know,
the last thing, I'm sorry,
go ahead,
I'll let you talk.
No, I will. Yeah, go ahead.
You
made me think about something.
White clubs,
no, you just made me think about something, but I'll try to keep it in my 55-year-old brain. Go ahead.
Okay. Imagine
that.
What is your relationship with either Romney or Rick Santorum or perhaps Newt? Because we are desperately in need of a vice presidential candidate.
A couple of years ago, and some of you might even have helped me because the LA County Republican Party recruited me to run for Congress when the wave was, the Tea Party wave was in the country, and we didn't know it could have come to California. That would have been awesome to jump those rockets and come out our way. And so they said we might have a shot at this, and I said, okay, I'm gonna try it. I moved back from Washington. I had never given up my residency in California. Moved into a district I didn't know and tried to run, but I'm just not sure. In fact, one of my friends, Marvin Olasky, said, "You're gonna run for office? What qualifies you to run for office?" I said, "I used to steal and cheat and lie for a living." Very qualified to be a congressional representative. It did take, and it might. I'm not going to say that it's not my future, but I'll tell you something about the vice president. Back on your original question, what is my relationship with them? I'm in the media, and so I pretty much stay neutral on voicing opinion about who, if I were to vote today. It looks like California might actually get the way in, and we've never had that opportunity before because the primaries are usually done by this point. But that said, I already have somebody that I would prefer to be the vice president, and I think that she would make an excellent vice presidential choice and or a presidential choice. And she's in a major battleground state that we need, and it's Florida. She's made history in that state because she is the first African-American female to ever be a lieutenant governor, ever in the history of the country. Even Democrats haven't had this success to be able to put in a lieutenant governorship, which is a voted position, elected position as a lieutenant governor. Her name is Jennifer Carroll. She's decorated military. She's in charge of the state of California, all of their international and foreign affairs. This is what she does for the new Governor Rick Scott down there. She was an elected official prior to that, so she has a track record of running and winning elections. She was in the State House, and yet we don't even know her. And so I'm looking to push her name out every opportunity. So every time somebody asks about Vice President, I want them to go Google Jennifer Carroll. She's beautiful. She's not only black, she's black and beautiful. And, you know, it would be very, very hard for the left to challenge her because of so many accomplishments and holding her head so high. And as I said, she's served in our armed forces. So whichever of those three might be, if the rumors in D.C. are not correct, that they are looking forward to a, not necessarily brokered, but an open convention where they're going to actually put somebody else in there. But if one of these three happen to be, then having somebody that has some type of international experience or resume would be very important for our side, because Barack Obama, we can see the ads already since he killed bin Laden. And perhaps will be postponed the brink of Iran until he needs to bring it up again. So yeah, thank you. I'm flattered when people ask me about running, but there are a lot of places that you can play in this, and I think that I'm very much more of value to our side in the media, and that's why I'm launching my own TV show through my nonprofit. We are buying time on the Word Network. If you can get that time, it's full right now, but we're shaping to own our own program, self-funded, self-produce it, and then buy time on this network. Because, as I said, the demographics in this country have shifted. It's underappreciated that if the exact numbers of people that voted in this last election had voted 20 years ago at the same percentage, at the percentage reality of that era, then John McCain would be the president. Let me see if I can phrase it another way. In 20 years ago, the minority population represented about 13% of the electorate. Today, it's 26%. It has doubled, and that's one of the reasons that even at those numbers, and it's going to get under 18. I shouldn't say worse, because I think that diversity is a positive thing. It just depends on their world. And that's why it's so critical that they understand what this country is about. It's not multiculturalism and diversity, as they've learned in all of their schooling. But when they learn what this country is about, under 18, that's when the white community is no longer the majority community. Under 18 right now, minorities outnumber the majority of whites in our society. So over time, we could be a very, very different country. So I want to stay in the media. I want to build myself as an over the right. I think that with my story and with my titles work, and of course if I got in, if I had won the Congress, I would have went in there, I would have said all kind of horrible things that would have made me lose my job, plus it was a liberal district, so I would have lost it anyway. But you're right, then I would have come out as the former congressperson, then I would have been able to perhaps increase a platform. But that's not the only way to increase a platform. Or increase hers without running for office. Rush Limbaugh is very powerful and has never run for office. Sean Hannity, the list is long. But what I don't see is somebody with my background, with my ethnicity, with my gender, and with my looks that are on our stage, and my friends, selling this message. And so it's interesting. And my modesty, yeah, that's true. I'm a little shy. I know. I'll have to overcome that as I'm getting this show. But what we found on this Word Network is it's in 85 million homes. And it's a 90% black audience, and they're all evangelicals because it's like a Christian BET. And what's interesting about it is, these are the folks that keep polling. They keep telling the pollsters that they're evangelical and conservative. About 33% of the black community for the last 20 years keep saying they're evangelical and conservative. Well, we think naturally, because we hear 95% of blacks voted for Barack Obama, that, oh, the blacks just all voted for Barack. No, what we didn't hear is that 25% of voting age blacks didn't vote at all. Now, why would they not vote in this monumental year that everybody's voting for the first black president? It's making history. These are those evangelical conservatives. So they're not politically engaged. Most of them are not even registered, but I figured once I scared the pants off of them, they might at least decide to engage themselves.
One last thing. I'm sorry.
That's all right. We've been coming in. We have plenty of time.
In July, I belong to Kufi, Christians United for Israel.
Oh, yeah.
And there were a lot of evangelical blacks there. And
they're on fire for Israel.
We can change, excuse me?
I said they're on fire. See, this is what our side needs, is the passion of African Americans to join our side. And that's what I want to do, is get more. Because once they get it, I was just at UCLA. African American man in the audience who came from Connecticut. He said he was in the ghetto in Connecticut, raised by a single mom, and now he's out of UCLA. And his roommate was a Republican, a white. And his roommate talked him into coming to my speech that night. And he just sat and listened. And the next thing you know, he was in the question line, and he said he had never in his life heard anything near what I said in his whole life, ever. He just went on and on. He was just like shaking. He was changed. He wanted to go to dinner. He was just, well, what can I sign up? Where do I get information I need? Once then we get the passion from this particular community, which is what we are sorely missing in articulating what has broken down and what needs to really be done to fix it. And that's one of the reasons that I keep pushing this message. So yeah, I know that group, and I know that there are, that's the one with John Hankey, is that the same? Yeah, oh my goodness. But see, the black evangelical community kind of gets it on Israel inherently because they read the Bible. They know this is where they're supposed to be. It's when the lines get blurred is when it comes to economic policy, and we can convince them all day that this is just good for business. But if you show them, I won a whole group one time, I was at a church meeting, a black church meeting, and I told them, to think deeply about minimum wage, because they just totally support this idea. And I said, you know what, let me just tell you something about the damage of minimum wage. And I can give you all the intellectual arguments and all the economic arguments for why this is not a good idea. But if you want a scriptural argument, then let's look at Ruth. I mean, had there been a minimum wage during Ruth's time, she wouldn't have met Boaz, because she wouldn't have been able to glean. And if she would have met Boaz, she would have been able to be the grandmother of King David, and listen to the genealogy of Jesus. There are only like 3 women in there, She was like really girl power. So, but if they had those laws standing in her way, we need governmental barriers removed so that people can live free. That's what Frederick Douglass talked about. So, young man, did you still have a question? Yeah,
me?
If I call you young man, you would actually really have me come out to
Yes, I do have a question.
Yes, sir.
Your message plays very well in front of conservative audience. How does it play in front of a not conservative audience?
Well, when you say non-conservative, I don't speak to many liberal groups. Like I would not go and speak at the NAACP. I'm very selective about if I'm going to sell my message in the black community and I go through the churches. It's very well received because they understand, they know what has broken. They just haven't been able to figure out why. They've been lied to all their lives. I mean, look, when I ran for this seat, one reason I decided to run is because the Republicans hadn't run anyone there in 20 years. Now, whose fault is that they just keep voting for liberals? If we don't make a case, or we, then after a while it becomes a reality that Republicans don't care, that the liberal ideas are the right ideas. If you keep hearing the same thing over and over again, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, people fear nothing more terribly than to stand out against prevailing thought. So even if you kind of inherently know that there's something wrong with that, but everybody else is kind of saying, okay, it seems normal. So we have to interject our message in there. But when I go out to black groups where I know that is an audience that is a reflection of the community, then automatically I know 30% in that room are going to agree with me 100%. Then I know that there are others that just kind of need sorting through. I also know there's a hard left, and they will usually show themselves out because I've seen it too many times. Through my organization, we host pastor forums with the black pastors in various communities. And one time I was, the one in Chattanooga was probably by far the worst, where the guy got up and just started shouting, "Get out of here, get her out of here, you need to shut her down." And the other pastor said, "Excuse me," including the one who invited me, "This is my church, we invited her. And I might not agree with everything she's saying, but this is wrong." But what happened in Alaska was really interesting. It was on pro-life, and you know, we're trying to get, actually, they had an initiative on, well, it actually was a law, where you had to have parental consent to have an abortion. And it was a law for 10 years, and the liberals got control and they took that away from the people of Alaska. They want it back. They want protection. They don't want their 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds going to abortion clinic, kill their grandchildren without them knowing. And so they want it back, so I helped them launch that initiative. So of course we need the black community there, because even though it doesn't seem like a lot of blacks would be in Alaska, most people say, what are blacks doing in Alaska? It's cold up there. But there's a lot of military installation up there, so the blacks are up there, and then they just stay and they raise their families there. But anyway, so we're at this church forum, and you know, I'm trying to make this case, and what was interesting, the challenge to get this thing back in law was in one committee, it was held in committee, and the only black legislator, female, was the one holding it up. She was A. Well, what I didn't know was she was in that room that evening. No one told me that, but she was, and there's a representative, but she was there. So I made my little spiel for why this is so important to our community. I know all the stats the same way I know about what's happening in welfare. I know what has happened in abortion too. Margaret Sanger fulfilled her dream. That was for sure. And still living on, and we just can't seem to get that money away from her in 13. But so anyway, I shared with them all of that, and sure enough, the first woman up, her, and she went on and on. She looked out at those pastors and dared them to even think about getting their phone call returned if they had even given me any opportunity to you know, to make the case that they were going to challenge her to make sure that this thing got out of committee. Then she stormed out of the room, and that's what she should not have done, because by now the pastors are grumbling and talking, and you know, you can't deny the facts, not just what they've done to blacks in abortion clinics. I mean, you think Gosnell is you know, just showing out? I mean, Gosnell did us a favor to show the baby parts so that people will connect again with that we are pulling children limb from limb in the room. And we act like, you know, that there's nothing wrong with this activity. But anyway, so I let them know what's happening as well, not just, you know, the political reality or the genocidal reality that, you know, we're going to, if we, at these current abortion rates, blacks will just disappear from this society. So the pastors were kind of starting to discuss this a little bit. And then a couple of them just got up and, yeah, but you know what, we're not going to join our enemies, and you're just a Republican sellout and all that other kind of stuff. And then another pastor got up, and I know it's a long answer to your short question, but one pastor got him back in the room, and he said, now you all know me. You could tell he was one of the senior pastors of the community. And this happens a lot in black communities. There's still a respect for the seniors, and then it moves down. But with one of them, you get one of them, it will change. You get, if we can ever get the Church of God in Christ, for instance, they represent 8 million people, that kind of thing. So, get them because they're left in, so Vietnamese. But the non-denomination and the Baptists are more open. This pastor got up and he said, you know what? I've been sitting here listening to this Parker, and I don't know what to tell you, but you know, about what's going to happen after this legislator they named her cut the strings, you know, and slammed the door between us. He said that what she's telling us is right. He said, because you all know me. He said, and you know my grandson. It's really interesting. He said, you all know my grandson. So I'm assuming his grandson is also a pastor in the community. He said, but what you don't know is that my grandson was a twin. And he started telling them this story. The guy is choking, and he's telling them how his daughter went to a clinic. And he said, I didn't know nothing about this. I didn't know nothing about this. He said, that's why we need this bill. I didn't know nothing. And he's just like sharing his heart. Then he says, you know, and I didn't know that she had gone in there. And then she was, but she was sick. And then we took her to the hospital to find out what was wrong with her. And that's when we found out that she had had an abortion. And the doctor said, well, there's another one in there. You want us to kill this one? And he said, are you kidding? No. He said, that's why my grandson. It was like, Then this lady got up and ran out of the room, and I just thought, oh, wow. Because I have counseled women all over this country. I mean, I was telling the kids earlier at the dinner that, and I call them kids because, you know, they're younger than my daughter, so I can call them kids. They probably might be called kids, the young adults that invited me here. As I was telling them, you know, earlier that in our crisis pregnancy centers now, you know, was all about, in the beginning, saving the baby, saving the mother, getting her on the right track. Well, now the post-abortive side is growing tremendously, where we have memorials, people can name, because see, now these women, Roe v. Wade has been law long enough that people are starting to connect with what has happened to their life and to their family, and you know, it's her grandparents and men and all this, and so we have that uniqueness in our clinic. So anyway, so I'm thinking that that's why the lady just ran out. Maybe she was kind of confronting, you know, some of the things in her life. But it wasn't true at all. What happened was after I left out of the room, here goes this car speeding over, and I'm thinking, oh my God, that lady's gonna run me down. She's like, no, I'm just so glad you're here. She went and got her granddaughter. She's like, tell her what you just told us. Tell her she's sitting in the car. She's like, I'm like, honey, I have a plane game. No, you say you tell her everything you just told us in that room. I'm like, oh, Lord. And my point is, when they hear it, they get it. You know, it's like, you know, often we internally say our work is like Jonah. The Ninevites didn't know he was coming, but when they got there, they received the message. You know, you look at the woman at the well, and a lot of people say a lot of different things about who she was. Some would say she was a harlot or whatever. Some theory is that she was actually a prophetess. She was just barren, and when the Lord spoke to her, he was just really telling her that your next husband's going to put you away because you haven't birthed any children either. And that was the prophecy in it, because they said otherwise, why would they have blessed her? You know, they would have stolen a prostitute. They would not. All the men would have come out and listened to her, and all, you know, all these things, and all these theories, and that's fine. But the point is that when she went back and she got her people, and then they came and they heard the Lord, they said, "We believe this. You go now." I think that the more we share, it's one reason I'm going to do the show, and I'm very encouraged, not just by, you know, being able to come to Temple, and that we do have now technology that allows us to share it, so I don't have to worry about the numbers and who did come, who didn't, even though I appreciate those that are in the room, because you know, the more we get the message out, that's why the left fights is so hard, because they know truth resonates. The proverb told us just the other day that inequity is overcome by mercy and truth. You know, you got it, once you say, oh God, I've sinned, you need that mercy. But the truth is what the left is afraid of, and that's why they try to shut us down. They don't want people to hear it, because there's something in the heart that resonates. People ask me, how did you change? I said, well, you know, what happened was, I was going to subsidize my little welfare check, because, you know, Uncle Sam, you know, he sends out 5 questions with the welfare to make sure that you were just dependent. 1, to make sure no one turned 18, nobody died, nobody got married, nobody went back to school, and nobody worked. Filled out that form, you were going to get your next check. Well, the checks aren't that much, you know, so you got to subsidize your income, and you couldn't work. So I went to work in under the table, you know, in a lot of small businesses just to survive. That's why I want to get rid of minimum wage, so that young people can get in there. They got to bring in a little bit of talent that, you know, just give them a little bit of money under the table so they can help them do a few things. And I went into this business in South LA, and they said they didn't pay like that. They were legitimate businessmen. And of course, I wanted to challenge them, because they were good-looking brothers. I figured I could party all day and party all night. What do you mean? I mean, you're mainstream. Don't you know Jesse Jackson? This country's inherently racist. You shouldn't be mainstreaming. And they challenged me back. They told me that my lifestyle was unacceptable. I'm like, unacceptable? That's a hate crime. You can't use that. They said, your lifestyle is unacceptable to God. And it was interesting. I hadn't heard God, but I knew when they said it that there was something to it. And that's why the left light was on truth. Because people, you know, they're walking through life, and then they hear information. I mean, you guys know, these kids in school, I've met a couple of them say, you know, I started here as a liberal, but, you know, after a while you hear it, it's like, you just know something's wrong with that. Well, the opposite is true with truth. When you hear it, it grabs you. And so they don't want people to hear it. And so we have to just keep pushing it out. Yes, sir.
Yes, so, like, what do you think is the major, like, setback that the Republican Party has in the North of engaging the African American community? Because it seems like in the South, like there's all these changing, you know, political dynamics. We have Tim Scott from the 1st District of South Carolina. We have Alan West. We have Herman Cain. We have Bill Randall, who I met down at CPAC in North Carolina. Like, how is this message resonating better down south, but not up north? Because it just seems like in Philadelphia, there's this incredible Democratic stronghold on the African American and Latino community.
Well, there is in those areas as well. I mean, the gentlemen that you just mentioned are representing Caucasian districts. They're not traditional black districts. We have a couple of problems. One is the gerrymandering that has taken place. We have allowed for certain communities to be untouchable to Republicans, and then Republicans just don't even bother to run anybody there. So there's no alternative message. You just buy into it, you just stay in that place, and then you start thinking that if we get just more money from government, we'll be okay. I mean, they know the reality of many of these communities is government, and and union activity. But number two is how we sell our message. I mean, think about us. I tell people, it's kind of like the salesman of laundry soap. Okay, you familiar with laundry soap Tide? Okay, in fact, it's on the front pages now because some reason people are stealing Tide. Because one while I went to CVS, they had a lock on the Tide, and then I saw 2 years later that people are stealing Tide. But anyway, you're hooked on Tide to clean your clothes. You're hooked on Tide because your mama used Tide. And then she used Tide because her mama used Tide. But you're the cheer salesman. But what you do, you have a couple options if you're a salesman. You can go in there and you can tell them how horrible that Tide is, which is what we've been doing for the last 20 years. You've got to be kidding. Why would you do somebody like Jesse Jackson? Well, they remember Jesse Jackson when Jesse Jackson was part of the Civil Rights Movement. And their mama has a picture of Jesse Jackson on her mantle. And she has a picture of her mantle of Jesse Jackson because during her time, Jesse Jackson was an important person. And to now try to tell them, no, this is evil. Well, you just told her mama that something's wrong with her Tide. Wait a minute, that's my mama used Tide. That's why I use Tide. As opposed to doing what Cheer did years ago, because I remember, because I do use Tide, because my mama used Tide. Now I use Trader Joe. I don't think it has a name on it, it's just clear. But I remember when Cheer used to put the little blue box in the mailbox. They would just leave your little free box. And they left you a little free box because they knew one day you were not going to go down to the store to get some Tide. You ran out, you got to do laundry tonight, and my goodness, you just are too tired to go down. So you're going to remember, oh, that little box of Cheer. And now you're going to use it and find out, wow, these clothes are really brighter. Maybe I should try Cheer. What we have to do is start thinking with a business mind. What we have become as Republicans is R&D. We're like research and development, and we have no marketing arm, which is another reason rather than more office I'm going to media, because we've got to start selling our ideas in places that it matters most. Think about when we were starting to really make strides in the Black community. What was the issue that Republicans thought was the most important that year? Affirmative action. Well, now to Black folks, affirmative action was not the most important issue. In fact, they thought that that's how they got to college, and the reason they felt that is because that is how their mama got to college. So, we have a challenge. Look what's happening now. We know we need 40% of that Latino community, but what do we want to talk about? Illegal immigration. Well, they don't want to talk about illegal immigration. They want to talk about why their children aren't doing well in school and what has happened to their values, their Catholic values that are broken down to the point that now, 50% of their children are being born out of marriage, and they got these gangs. That's where we have to meet people with the issues that are important to them, and we have to connect it to our answers, which are the right answers, in my opinion, even when it comes to gang activity and prison life. We have the right answers on our side. We're the ones, in fact, it's Republicans that have year after year tried to pass second chance legislation so that people that were incarcerated and have come back into the communities don't have a scarlet letter so that they can start to get employment and get that first run back into civilized society. But the Democrats won't sign on this to save their life, and Republicans just say, well, they're never going anywhere anyway, so they won't sign it. And yet it's our initiative, and it's been our initiative for 20 years that I've been in public life. Yeah, that's the question. Yes, sir.
Yeah, when you look at the liberal leaders, the progressive leaders that perpetuate the same mentality, the same liberal mentality and policies that we've had for 50 years that you refer to, how many of them do you think are indeed motivated to help people versus the percentage that you think are motivated to give people just enough to get their votes so that they can get control and get rich?
I think more are motivated by the latter. I think that, there's just no question that liberals have taken over the areas of social work in our society. They've convinced us that there's that the general welfare clause means that we should pool our resources to help people, and people bought into it. They've even convinced some of our religious institutions. This is what Catholic Charities is dealing with right now. It's like, oh my goodness, it's finally catching up with us that there is no, fellowship between light and dark. As the Bible talks about, you can't have it both ways. You can't. George Bush, you think he would have learned, and the minute he got to Washington, he started a faith-based initiative. We had just got the women off welfare. Why not put the churches on? And the minute that they started putting the churches on welfare, there comes the government to say, oh, but you can't do these things. And so then they're trying to find ways to get around this term proselytizing. it just won't work. If you can't speak into people's lives as individuals, then it's not going to work. So I think that, you know, something happens. That's one another reason that I'm so thankful for this young man that has hosted us today, Laurel, because he was telling me he came to study social work. And then it was like, oh my goodness. Because you get into social work classes, and keep in mind the liberals have controlled public education for a long time, including at the university level. And so they are a place to indoctrinate, and that's what they do. And they start real early to convince even those that may have started with a good heart to go help people. They convince them that help cannot happen without the greedy in our society giving up more. And once you buy into that, and they convince them that even their parents were greedy, and they make them feel guilty for that they were able to acquire in their lives, it's hard for me to say that, you know, they're innocent bystanders. You know, they're part of the problem. They're much part of the problem. And after a point, you do cross over. It's kind of like a Shawshank Redemption. After a point, you're an institutional, and now they're just protecting that interest. And that's why it is going to take a major effort to reduce the size and scope of government. We saw UT parties, no, we got there, you had fresh energy, and then we started finding out how Washington works. So, God, it's not impossible. Not impossible, but it is going to take a little while for us to start peeling back, because you've got to get the public on your side to peel back. The payroll tax holiday was a perfect example. Mayor just threw up the white flag. Why? Because people in the grassroots didn't even know that this is the Social Security tax. They were just like, well, why would the Republicans be against a tax? You know, a tax cut. He says, well, it's the wrong tax. That is the Social Security tax. We already asked for 2% to go into private accounts. Now you want 2% to go to Walmart. It's not going to work. You're going to, the system's already in trouble. Now you're taking more money out of it. And so we just have a lot more education that has to go on. But no, you know, in my book, Uncle Sam's Plantation, I did a lot of research about that point in our history. You go all the way back to the 30s. When we were told we had nothing to fear but fear itself. You know, knowing that the scripture says fear God and keep his commandment. But the government began to get into places that it didn't belong in the expansion of this idea that the general welfare clause meant to, you know, pay for that sin. You know, some things are so egregious there is no pay. It's just a matter of just saying I'm sorry, you know, and moving on. And that's one. Slavery, there's nothing that we can do. Certain times, you know, people ask me all the time, well, what do you want them to do after you know, give them Roe v. Wade? You're going to round up doctors? You know what? We didn't round up slave owners. You know, some sin is just so egregious that it just weighs you down that after it's over, you just say, it's over. It's just over. And that's what we need to do on that front too. But yeah, a lot of them bought it, and Washington is thriving by it. I mean, you get out there and you'll find out there ain't no recession out there. So yeah, there are a lot of people that get a lot of money because of keeping the status quo. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I just made a comment. I completely see a parallel with what you said about dependency on the government and how that keeps the Black community down. But I also think now, you know, before the 1960s, before there was Medicaid and Medicare and all those social programs which came in to birth really in the 60s, as far as the Latino community is concerned, and the recent immigrant, I'm a daughter of immigrants who came in the 50s. Prior to all those social service programs of the liberals that came about in the 60s, the immigrants who came here had to post bond. They didn't come here. There were no social. They could not access. They didn't come here for welfare. They came here for the freedom to work, to own a business, to educate their kids.
Right.
The liberal policies of welfare have changed the dynamics of immigration as well. Now, if you come here as an immigrant, legal or illegal, you get free K through 12 public school education. You get free lunch, free breakfast, entitlement programs. It is that insidious evil. I mean, it's a whole different dynamic. I resent, because of who I am, I resent so much the conversation of the left that says that, if you are opposed to illegal immigration, if you are opposed to the entitlements and the benefits that places illegal immigrants above U.S. citizens and those who came here legally, that you are somehow a racist or a bigot. Right. And I think that conversation has to change too. And I think it's horrible that now, 48%, almost half of Latinos, whether they're born here or immigrating here, don't graduate from high school.
Yeah.
We have one of the worst high school dropout rates.
Unbelievable.
We don't hear that voice. We don't see it on The View. We don't see it on Fox. We need to be heard from that.
Well, and it's interesting because there are some voices that are rising, and especially now with the new internet world and the cable world. The time is cheap. And in fact, I'm doing a panel, and one of our panelists is actually a Latino, because you're absolutely right. You know, when you think about the ethnicities in our society, blacks have a unique history, and they're the only ones with this unique history. Even with the Latinos and any other group, the Latino population, especially the Mexican, the newer immigrants that are coming in, illegally in Mexico, and then Belize and some that touch our country, they just every day work to get here, and come on up and they can get here to California. But they're leaving oppression, going to freedom. You're absolutely right. They're just like everybody else that left, whether it was Ireland or Italy or anywhere in Europe, or they were leaving oppression, going to freedom. This is what this country was founded on. And the early Latino immigrant, or we might call Hispanic, was the same way. Blacks were unique because they were basically free at that time, and then they were brought into slavery. So that's a unique situation. But what has happened is ethnicity has become politicized. I mean, even that term Hispanic is a political term. It's meaningless. There is not a relationship between these different ethnic groups that come from various countries that are Spanish speaking. I mean, very little bit. And some of them can't even understand each other's their language. They speak so probably. But it has become a political ploy of the left to divide and conquer, and their conquering is to increase the size and scope of government for political gain and power. So it's like a drug. It becomes very addictive. It's alluring. The next thing you know, numbers are coming in. You just get over that border and get pregnant, and you are availed to a full life. And so for people that do try to deny that aspect of what we've seen, are not looking clearly at the transition from those that, as you mentioned, came in prior to the 50s, before we had all these social welfare programs. And at that time, and during that time, immigration had its own natural stabilizer, and that's why it worked really fine for people to come in and assimilate and have one language and one common goal. But we're far from that since the general welfare state, and that's why I've just dedicated my life to dismantle it, if I have to do it by myself, piece by piece, because it has destroyed communities, and it has destroyed families, and it's destroyed the cohesiveness of this country, and will collapse. We will just absolutely collapse. And I don't think that, getting back to this question, that there are many, including those that have political power, even in the White House, that care whether we collapse. They want to transform us anyway. They never liked what we have and what we represent, and so they would be very willing to think that they can build some utopia by starting all over, and it's just not going to happen. Yes, man, I'll come here, and then I'll come here, and then I'll ask what time it is.
I was just going to say, I agree with a lot of what you said. Like, I remember you said that they try to indoctrinate the youth about like stuff, and I know that my mosaic teacher is trying to convince us right now that communism is good and that capitalism is good. Well, he's trying to say that capitalism is mean to poor people, basically, and that capitalism always makes it so that there's losers. But that wasn't really what I was going to ask. But like what I want to say was that like there's this guy I work with, and he believes, like you said, he thinks that anybody that he's Puerto Rican, he thinks that any Puerto Rican that votes Republican is a sellout for Puerto Ricans, because Puerto Ricans aren't Republicans apparently.
Has he ever lived in Puerto Rico?
No.
That's one of the ethnic group or parts of the Spanish, or what they call Latino community, that is Republican. It's a Republican. They're like the Cubans.
Well, the Cubans coming up.
Yeah, but go ahead anyway. So he's the one that's kind of like opposed to the rest of his culture.
Well, he always says that, and then like I would work with him and a bunch of the other guys, and then like they would go and get money from my dad, who's the businessman, and then like he'll go and give them like a lot of money, and then all of a sudden they'll go and blow all their money on like new clothing, new cell phones, and they won't pay their child support. And then when they have the their child support due, then they'll be like, oh, where's my money? Like it's like you already spent it. And then like these same people are saying, well, Uncle Sam should give us more money.
Right.
Like what I'm saying is, do you think that like if people go and help like the poor like get smart and like give them better education, that like it will help them make better decisions?
I think that we should offer the opportunity in every poor community for money to follow children to the school their parent wants. Because most parents want the school for their children. And many of these kids that are in the harder hit communities, their grandparent is still somewhere engaged in their life. And that means they're from this generation that still understands core values. So when they get a vouchers, they send their kids to religious schools. That's why the NAACP and the People for the American Way are the first ones to sue every time we pass a voucher initiative. Because poor people take their kids to religious schools where men have collars and sticks in their hands. And the nuns have little rulers and educational codes. So that's what I think should happen, is we need to build a moral framework for people to understand the responsibility they have to live here. Freedom is not free. Rights come with responsibilities, and that message is not getting out. So where we educate is we fight for vouchers. We don't keep giving handouts. If you give even a handout, educational scholarship, and try to, like you're saying, we get money. People get an outrage when they find out that they're taking the money that we gave them for welfare to the casino. Well, it's their money. Once it's in their hand, it's like, okay, you gave it to them. Of course they're going to take it to the casino. You can't. They control what they do with it. They tried that in food stamp. When they first gave food stamp, people were spending on all kind of food. So then, what does the liberal fix? Well, rather than say, you're not getting food stamp anymore, you're on your own to get food. No, they decide, well, we'll do WIC stickers. So that way, WIC stickers, you can only use it for milk and cereal and things that, that are a little bit more healthy for their breakfast. And then when they didn't give the kid the breakfast anyway, they just said, okay, well, then we'll just do a breakfast program at school. And then maybe they'll give them lunch. They didn't do lunch, so now we'll give them a lunch program at school. And then now they want a dinner program at school. But yet when we argue for orphanages, they're like, what? You can't have orphanages? Why? We would give them breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Maybe even a warm bed. But they need a moral framework is the answer to your question. Yes, sir?
I was going to say, one of my talk about liberals is that when I talk about the moral framework and stuff like that, like I'll be like, well, I think you're talking about how it's good for that people like are in a marriage, and if they have kids in a marriage, and it's a two-person household or whatever. And I found it's really difficult because then people will be like, well, what makes you better than me? Like, I was born outside of marriage, and they'll be like, I'm turned out fine.
No, they didn't, because they're liberal.
Yeah.